Oh. This video is sponsored by FlexiSpot.
Things have changed a lot since I started this channel back in 2019. Back then, I was mostly excited by the famous big brand watches that dominated the lower cost segment. They generally had the best designs, a string of budget, historically significant models, and arguably offered the best value for money overall. These days though, I often end up favouring watches released by smaller brands. While the big boys have been shifting up market, chasing trends and relaunching older models to varying levels of success, these newer companies have been progressing at an astonishing rate. For years, component quality hasn't really been the issue. Loads of companies can make a solid feeling watch with all the basic specs you'd expect at a given price point. The challenge has been making one that looks good enough to compete with or beat the industry giants. Most micro brands I've observed in my inbox over the last half decade have either been uninspiring or straight up unappealing from a visual standpoint, giving me little reason to pick them over the more established brands. But the tide has definitely started to turn. In the last 24 months in particular, a number of these smaller companies have begun figuring out that part too, with final results that, in many cases, trounce the historical market leaders. I can't think of a more fitting brand to illustrate this than Vaer. I previously called these Vaer, but apparently it's Vaer. Based out of Venice Beach, Los Angeles, Vaer first contacted me way back in 2019. I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't super interested at the time. The watches were well made from the looks of it and were even US assembled, but the designs, they didn't get my juices flowing. Their initial offerings had this rudimentary, concept-like appearance that looked a couple of stages away from a finished product. So I had to pass. Not long after, I briefly looked at one of their watches, the C3 Tradition. This model isn't quite available anymore, but they do offer something similar in the S3 range. A marked improvement visually, with a very slim case. It was decent, but I didn't love it. Fast forward to early 2024, and they email me again, this time about their most recent releases. And wow, what a difference a few years makes. Now, some of their older designs were and still are in production, but nearly every new watch in this email looked like an absolute banger. In fact, they were nearly unrecognizable as being from the same company. Easily one of the most exciting emails I've received over the past few years. Out of nowhere, Vaer was back on my radar. I initially planned to just cover them on my unboxing channel, which I basically created for this exact purpose. You see, I love covering these inventive, smaller brands. However, such videos almost never perform well view-wise, meaning we often make a loss on our highly produced Ben's Watch Club videos, which, as you can guess, isn't very sustainable from a business perspective. So I created In the Loop as a means of covering these lesser-known brands, as well as the latest releases, in some capacity, without having the same time or monetary constraints as a fully produced review. That said, once I unboxed these and saw them in the flesh, I felt guilty. I felt guilty because these watches were awesome and I wasn't planning on giving them the full treatment. And as you can guess, given that this video you're watching right now exists, I caved. I feel like it's my responsibility to make you aware of the best watches, the best ways of spending your money. And Vaer, if you're considering them, well, how about I just show you? This review will primarily focus on the initial two pieces they sent over, the D5 Pacific Dive Watch and the R1 Chronograph. However, I'll also touch on some models we received more recently, which are likely heading to some of our blog writers. This does mean I've tried a wide range of Vaer watches, all powered by different movements too, so hopefully I can give you a pretty thorough analysis. I'll run you through the pros, cons, and everything in between. I'll have each of them affiliate linked in the video description if you want to check them out. And yeah, we did receive these as review samples. This video wasn't quite planned, but yeah, just bear that in mind. First off is the watch that started this love affair, the D5 Pacific. I've had a look through my back catalogue, and this has to be the most distinctive and unique diver I've ever covered on Ben's Watch Club. I don't just say that because of the colour scheme either. Indeed, this green version, the Anacapa, may as well be the official Ben's Watch Club watch, with a colour scheme that's near identical to our branding. So yeah, I'm biased here. I love this palette and it's rare to find it on a wristwatch these days. While our branding is more Art Deco inspired, these colours seem to equally suit the more playful, tropical approach taken by Vaer with the D5. Overall, I think it looks phenomenal. And this rare combination provides a surprisingly luxurious, exclusive feel that I'm yet to find on a big brand watch at this price. We'll get to the details in a moment, but it's worth pointing out that this watch also comes in 2 other equally punchy colorways. In a bizarre turn of events for me, I almost went with the Malibu, whose eccentric tones are a far cry from the safety of my wardrobe. This could be the sexiest take on the recent playful watch trend that I've seen, and had the green not existed, I'd have been just as excited to try it. There's also the bright yet more conventional Rincon, whose red-blue setup doesn't exactly look bad either. What really sells this design for me is the depth and complexity of the dial. It's got this unique 3-tier setup with a recessed channel sandwiched between a flat central portion and an elaborate checkered chapter ring. The markers are like tiny bridges, each spanning this gap and casting a shadow on the cavity beneath. Those indexes are also unlike most others. Well, on the watch I received anyway. Rather than the ever-present silver strips topped or embedded with lume, these markers present themselves like solid, tall blocks of lume, which give the D5 even more character from tight angles. This is where I stumbled upon an inconsistency. You see, the online imagery shows this model as having more traditional silver bordered markers, which was definitely different than the watch they sent me. I asked the brand which version is currently shipping, and it turns out I'd accidentally received an early concept version. The retail version apparently ships with the more standard markers depicted in the product shots. It doesn't massively change the look of the watch, but I have to say I prefer the border-free version with its quirky yet extra clean styling, so it's a shame it's been dropped. Marker discrepancy aside, that's still the main overall theme with the D5 Pacific. There's a lot going on with an impressive amount of depth, yet they've managed to avoid the sense of clutter and excess that often comes with these more elaborate experimental designs. The amount, size, and placement of the typefaces used are near perfect across the board. No ugly logo or obvious letdown. The handset, while basic, feels like the perfect choice, and even the date wheel sits in an aesthetic central position. Topping all this off is an elegant, slim sapphire bezel, which has a gorgeous gleam and a matching two-tone color scheme, providing an additional premium touch. It also has an extremely fine coin-edged rim, which does a better job of preserving some of those dressier hints versus the more rugged bezels fitted to other models in the D5 range. This particular one is named after the Channel Islands National Park off the California coast, and I'd say the luscious detailing of the D5 does a phenomenal job of echoing this natural beauty. Of course, there are other parts of this watch to mention. I won't spend all day fawning over the dial. Straddling the bezel is a double-domed sapphire crystal with a competent anti-reflective coating. This is the best material for the money, of course, though I'd be interested to see what a flat crystal model would look like, as I think it could still work well. The crown is perhaps the only bit I would alter. It functions with no complaints, it's very grippy, though it's perhaps a little on the large side for my taste. Quite frankly, the build quality between this and an entry-level big brand diver isn't even close. The case offers up a beautifully contoured shape, adorned with sharply twisting omega-like lugs and thick polished chamfers. The remaining surfaces are delicately brushed, including the case rear. Overall, it looks awesome from just about any angle, and the claw-like lugs also aid with fit as well as finish, giving the D5 a flush on-wrist position that leaves no unnecessary gaps. It's also got widely accessible dimensions, including a 40.1mm case width, 39mm bezel, 46mm lug-to-lug, and an 11.5mm case thickness, which ends up as 14mm when including that domed crystal. On the site it says it's a 39mm watch, but yeah, that is actually the bezel size. While I'd say it fits a tad smaller than the 40.1mm diameter suggests, sadly, it's verging on too big for my skinny arm, which is a shame as I otherwise love this design. I'm definitely jealous of you who can rock this. It's even more gutting as the bracelet is decent too. It's got plenty of room for adjustment, even for thin wrists like mine, which is aided by the Nodex branded clasp that ships with this piece. Well, if you choose that option anyway. Like some other quick adjust systems, you can use the rear mounted button to activate a hidden slide rail to make fine alterations to the fit. As a whole, this works very well. The only drawbacks I've noticed versus similar alternatives are that the rail feels a little bit wobbly when fully extended, and it doesn't permit quite the same level of precision as other clasps whose slots are positioned closer together. Additionally, one of these clasp buttons has a tendency to stick from time to time, indicating looser than ideal tolerances. Despite all this, it's still a darn sight better than what you get on most watches, which can be much more finicky, so I can overlook its shortcomings for the most part. The rest of the bracelet is pretty good. It does have a rather plain brushed finish, but it does have solid steel links throughout, as well as quick release tabs if you want to switch it out. They provided this watch with other straps too, though it seems a shame to forgo the aforementioned fancy clasp. If you were buying this watch, that's probably the one I'd go for. Through the sapphire-equipped exhibition rear, you also get a glimpse of the ubiquitous Miyota 9015 automatic movement. It's pretty accurate, fairly smooth, and slightly quieter than the cheaper Miyota 8000 series movements. While it can be obtained for substantially less elsewhere, and while I don't love it, the 9015 also has no glaring weaknesses. It's still used by many competitors at this price, so its usage here is understandable. Vaer advertises -5 to +15 seconds a day for this one. My unit clocked in right at that -5 seconds a day mark. All of these Vaer watches have fantastic low light performance, by the way, as you can see here. It turns out the lume light markers on the D5 weren't just for show. They're bright, last ages, and even the bezel has a nice pop to it. The whole package holds up very well under macro examination. Overall, it's one of the most original watches I've seen for sure. If they made this in 37 or 38mm, I'd be wearing this all day, every day. Now, the D5 Pacific, it isn't a cheap watch. From a price of around $649 US, or about £600, it's towards the upper end of what I cover here on Ben's Watch Club. But it absolutely has the special sauce that many brands seem to be missing and consequently chasing. You can see and feel the wiseness with which this cash has been spent with the D5 Pacific. It feels like you truly have something exclusive on your wrist. I, for one, feel like it more than earns that price tag. Now, if you're more budget conscious or would prefer a different size, which I kind of would, there are alternative versions of this watch available. The DS5, for example, is a stripped back version of the D5, which is available for nearly half the cost. You can grab that one in 38mm or 42mm, whether that's the bezel width or case width, I don't know, but it's got a comparable aesthetic. It does have some compromises, though it seems like a good value pick, so I'll also link it below. Alternatively, there's a string of other automatic divers with similar specs and performance, though none have drawn me in the same way as the Pacific Trio. Now, what else have I been looking at? Well, you're probably keen to learn what this funny looking thing is. This is the R1 Racing Chronograph, a barrel-shaped 38mm watch with 60s and 70s design cues. There are very few of these tonneau-like watches that I think look good, very few, but this is one of them, I think. Unlike most I've seen, it's not overly bulbous or cartoonishly thick. Sure, it has a big boxed crystal, which is again sapphire, but as a whole, it's still relatively slim and maintains some lug curvature, allowing it to slip under the odd sleeve or two. The case finishing is just as good as the D5, with a radial brushing effect on the upper area and some very shiny liquid-like polished portions on the sides. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not the most attractive case in the world. I don't find any of these cushion case style watches particularly sexy, but it's absolutely one of the most palatable versions I've seen to date. The size partially helps with that. It comes in either a retro 38mm fit like this one, or a larger 42mm case if you want something more substantial. 38mm wears nicely, even on my small wrist, though I'd say it feels more like a 39mm just due to the chunky lug setup. As with the last model though, the real kicker is the dial. Again, there's a great amount of depth here, with texture-rich embedded subdials, each with an angled and independently coloured surround that makes them look like they're sitting even deeper. The rest of the setup, it is more predictable. It's got bright automotive colours, minimal text, and high contrast visuals that give good legibility. This chronograph is a fair amount cheaper than the previous dive watch, partially down to the movement choice. In here is the Seiko VK63 Meca-Quartz, which is widely used in these low-cost chronographs for several reasons. It has more tactile pushers, a faster reset time, and a smoother sweep than most quartz chronographs. There isn't much out there in terms of mechanical chronograph movements at this end of the market, outside of some very loud seagulls. So while it's nothing special, it's more from a lack of choice than anything else. The water resistance is at least good. 10 ATM with a screw back and screw down crown is again more than serviceable for most people. And while there's no transparent rear, given the VK63 isn't exactly a looker, it at least has a nicely engraved wavy pattern, alluding to the brand's surfer roots. Straps absolutely change the way this watch looks. While it's shipped with a high quality tan nylon band, it looks far sexier when paired with black leather, whether that's the optional extra Halloween strap offered by Vaer or a third-party one you may already have. You just get this far moodier biker vibe that better matches the tone of the R1. It feels solid, it's comfortable on the wrist, It looks very cool and unique, and it's much more original than the sea of weirdly named Daytona clones on AliExpress. That's about all I can ask of a budget chronograph. Is it a little expensive? Sure, I think this would have been better priced at $299 US ideally, though perhaps that's not viable given the US assembly. Those sorts of things, they do cost money. Next up, we'll head to the genre that first put Vaer on my radar. But first, I desperately wanted to change our B-roll setup. B-roll being the footage of all our watches in these videos. You see, I've been having some major back troubles because the place where I film the watches, including all the shots in this video, requires me to lean forward like the Hunchback of Notre Dame for hours at a time. As you can imagine, this hasn't been ideal. Luckily, today's sponsor FlexiSpot has not only saved my back, but my B-roll shots too. They sent me their new E7 Pro height adjustable standing desk, which has been a complete game changer in more ways than one. It's fully height adjustable, meaning you can find the perfect height for both sitting and standing, or in my case, somewhere in between, and then save these heights as button activated presets. One press, and the desk will quickly move to your pre-selected height. If you want to improve your posture and prevent injury, I can't recommend them highly enough. What's more, despite only having 2 legs, and even at chest height, the E7 Pro is still more stable than my previous 4-legged desk, partly due to the additional weight and high quality construction. In fact, it's so stable, it can easily lift my entire body, as you saw at the start. It also looks just so much better as a background for the watches. So moving forward, this is what you're gonna see. This is the black walnut, but you can get this model with multiple frames and desktop finishes, all of which ship with inbuilt cable management channels. They also sent me across the C7 Air, which is the most comfortable office chair I've ever tried, no doubt. The C7 can be adjusted again in just about every way to cater to your physique and preferences, and even comes with a movable headrest. My wife said it's the first time she's seen me without a hunch. FlexiSpot provides all kinds of furniture to meet your demands. If you want a premium standing desk for daily use, you can check out this E7 Pro or the regular E7. If you're on a limited budget, you can choose their E5 model, which I've already been using for months when filming these talking head shots. They've also got other award-winning chairs to suit your style. Unlock more savings by using the exclusive promo code provided in the description. Check the FlexiSpot link to enjoy these exclusive discounts. Vaer first appeared in my mentions with a string of popular field watch designs. While they have a massive range at present, they've most recently sent me some new quartz and solar quartz powered watches to take a look at in time for this review's release. First up are a pair of Dirty Dozen themed watches, the C3 and C5. They're essentially the same, just the former is 36mm and the latter is 40mm. While I won't explore it here, the Dirty Dozen were basically military watches produced for the British Army during the Second World War, made by 12 different Swiss watchmakers. They all share a similar design because they were made to the same Ministry of Defense specifications. Vaer, as a much younger brand, obviously isn't on that illustrious list. While these two certainly lack the distinctive visual characteristics of the previous two I've just looked at, the Vaer Dirty Dozens each do boast USA-built quartz movements, a rarity in the watch industry these days. As a brand, Vaer seems to be focused on preserving and continuing some of these elements of the American watchmaking industry, which I think is fairly typical. Given that the design is widely used, I think these may be a trickier sell to many of you out there, me included. As I've shown before on this channel, you can get watches that look very similar for a lot less and with comparable specifications. Now this version has pros and cons against some of those. Considering the military function-driven theming, I definitely think the crystal could be clearer. The domed sapphire on these is pretty reflective, with a noticeable blue hue that impacts visibility to a substantial degree. Additionally, the dial itself, as a result maybe of the crystal, it doesn't look pure black. I have to say, I prefer either the heavily textured or the silky black enamel dials offered by some other brands. Nevertheless, it does have some pleasing advantages, the most obvious of which is the case. While a little tame from the side, from above, the C5 and C3 have a gorgeous silhouette, the centerpiece of which being the super slender lugs, which are some of the thinnest I've seen on a watch. They feature a tiny chamfered edge, which provides a delicate glistening outline effect as you rotate the watch. Of course, I've tried plenty of watches with chamfers before, but there's definitely a unique effect caused by these particularly thin polished strips. In essence, the case looks much better than most watches of this style. They also have an attractive fully white syringe handset, which looks very clean, as well as luminescence that blows away most rival offerings. Both of these also ship with very durable rubber straps, fitted with quick-release tabs. The FKM Ocean strap that ships by default with the C3 is more comfortable, as the holes are closer together and there's a special slot in the end for the keeper to rest in, ensuring it doesn't wobble about. It's excellent and gives a sleek look, though the textured surface can accrue dirt and grime. That fitted to the C5 provides a more textured look from the outside, with more breathability at the cost of adjustability. The holes are pretty far apart. Out of the two, of course I prefer the C3, not just because it fits my tiny arm better, but because I also think it looks properly proportioned and in keeping with that retro design. If you can rock a 36, it's definitely my preferred pick. The C3 is perhaps the best fitting watch I've ever worn at my 6¼ inch wrist. If the $299 price tag seems a bit steep to you, or you're not particularly bothered by the American movement, Vaer offers up some far lower cost field watches in the S series, which rely on a Miyota movement and Chinese assembly, but have otherwise comparable performance. That said, I've been most excited to see what Vaer can do with their solar watches. After all, for a brand focused on performance and durability, solar feels like a sensible choice. Unfortunately, I've been left feeling a little underwhelmed by the C3 Tactical they sent over. I mean, it's okay. It's well priced at barely a scratch more than the standard Meca-Quartz watches, and the blacked out look certainly matches the moniker. The lume is also fantastic. That said, the dial just looks a little boring and predictable, lacking the character offered by the earlier Vaer watches. It kind of looks just like every other black dial field watch, which may suit some, but it's not what I'd be after anywhere past the $100 mark. The other watches managed to look both functional and stylish, which is the ideal combination, isn't it? This tactical vibe isn't very prevalent in the UK, given the absence of firearm legality or culture here, so it's no surprise that I find myself at odds with the C3 Tactical. Personally, if the Korean solar field watch comes back into stock, I'd absolutely pounce on that instead. It's lower cost, identically spec'd, and features a much more exclusive, attractive design, rarely touched by watch companies, who typically prefer these World War II inspired timepieces instead. That looks like one of the best value options on the watch market right now, if it looks half as pretty in the flesh at least. So that's 5 watches in total, 3 of which I'd recommend or I'd buy if they fitted me. And for Ben's Watch Club, I'd say that's a darn good strike rate. What's most surprising is that their founder is still their lead designer after all these years, which is insane. While they're not all hits, his progress in this area has been very impressive to see. So yeah, all the watches I mentioned are linked in the video description, as well as our sponsor FlexiSpot, and the discount codes are there too. If you're considering Vaer already, I doubt you'll be disappointed. You also won't be disappointed with this. Our video about a watch brand so dirty, they decided to steal their competitors' product shots and Photoshop their dials onto the watches. Think I'm kidding? I'm not. Take a look for yourself.